Okay. All right, Mr. Walker, I'm going to ask you a few questions about the night or the day of the accident that you're here to discuss. And I'd ask that you just answer the questions in a yes or no fashion if you can, because it's important that the court reporter be able to record your answers in the affirmative or negative fashion. Is that okay?
Yes.
Terrific. Okay, so Mr. Walker, I'd first like to talk to you about your activities on the day of the accident. You went to work that morning, didn't you?
I did, yes.
About 7 o'clock in the morning, is that correct?
Yeah, it was right around 7.
Okay, and is that usually when you go to work, or is that a little earlier than normal?
This was a little earlier than normal.
Okay, and why was that?
It's because I had a big project to get done.
Okay, so you were working on a pretty large project that day, so you went to work earlier than you normally do to get a head start. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and because of that big project, you also ended up working through your lunch hour. Is that right?
Well, for the most part, yes.
Okay, and do you normally work through lunch?
No, I enjoy to eat.
Okay,
I don't
so
miss
you
it
must. Okay, so you must have been really busy with this project then.
Yes, I was. Yes.
Okay, in fact, I think you mentioned that you just had a snack for lunch. Is that right?
Yeah,
You didn't,
it wasn't much of a meal. It was just a couple Twinkies, and that was about it.
Okay. Okay, and even after the snack that you had for lunch, you still took a while to finish this project, correct?
Yeah, I did, absolutely.
Okay, and it sounds like you actually stayed at work past the time that you normally do to complete the project, right?
Yes, for a little while we did stay longer than normal.
Great. And I'd imagine that you're pretty happy that it was done, but also pretty tired from putting in a pretty long day, right?
It was pretty exhausting working all day long. Yes.
I can imagine. So, so when you finished, you decided to go ahead and walk over to the Mad Hatter and have a pretty well-deserved drink to celebrate. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And when would you say you left your place of work?
I was thinking it was around 5:30. I knew we worked a little late, so I was just kind of guesstimating it was 5:30.
So you worked later than you normally do on this.
Yeah, a little while, yes.
And are you sure it was 5:30? Could it have been a little later?
It could have been. I didn't have a watch on, or I didn't look at a clock, so
Okay.
it might have been a little later than 5:30. Like I said, I was just estimating a time.
Okay, so when in your statement you said you left around 5:30 or so, it could have been later than that.
Yeah, it could have been, yes.
Okay, so what time would you say you arrived at the Mad Hatter bar? Would it have been around 6 or 6:30 in the evening?
Right around there, yes.
And how long do you think you stayed at the Mad Hatter?
I'd say no longer than an hour. It was right around an hour. It could have been 45 minutes, but right around an hour.
Okay, and how many drinks do you think you had that evening to celebrate?
I remember having 2 drinks.
Only 2? Are you certain that it was just 2?
I remember having 2 drinks.
Okay. There's certainly nothing wrong with imbibing a little bit after a hard day of work, and I know you had a lot to celebrate and didn't plan to drive anywhere. Do you think maybe you had a few drinks, maybe 3? Does that sound good?
I could have had 3 drinks, yes.
So just to recap, you worked basically an 11-hour day, and you worked through your lunch hour, which you don't normally do. And you had a big project that you finally finished that evening, and you stopped by a bar and you unwound a little bit and you had a few drinks over the span of around an hour. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds right, yes.
And then you left the Mad Hatter bar to walk home, correct?
Yeah, I was heading home.
Okay, and about what time do you think you left the bar?
I was around 7-ish, right around there.
Okay, now this is late November, right? November 23rd, I believe?
Yes.
Okay, and so by around 7 in the evening, it was already quite dark outside, yes?
Oh, absolutely. The sun went down about a half an hour before I left.
Great, and so were there street lights on, do you recall?
Yes, there was, yep.
Okay, and there were also Christmas lights, right, it being the holiday season?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of Christmas lights.
And it was snowing that evening, yes?
Yes.
So that must have been nice, walking along the street with snow falling and all of the red and the green holiday lights reflecting off the snow.
That was beautiful.
And I can imagine that though it makes for a nice scene, it might make it a little difficult to tell exactly what those red and green traffic lights are doing in the midst of all those red and green Christmas decorations and street lights and snow falling. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it was kind of difficult, yes. I mean, it was just confusing because there was lights everywhere.
Sure. And in fact, I've here in your written statement, and you can follow along if you'd like. In it, you say that it was a little confusing to tell what color the traffic lights were because of all of the decorations around with all of the different colored lights. Do you remember saying that, Mr. Walker?
I do, yes.
And I'd imagine that it would be confusing for anyone in that situation, and maybe even more so for someone who had just worked a really long, hard day and had had a few drinks and who wasn't expecting to see something like an accident right in front of them. In fact, would you mind taking a look at the second to last sentence of the second paragraph of your statement? I'll read it to you and just make sure you agree with what I say. You say that it was a little confusing to what color the traffic lights were because of all the decorations around with all of the different colored lights. Now, that is what you wrote down that night, correct?
Yes, it was.
So, understandably, you had a hard time really discerning just what was going on with those traffic lights, with all the other distracting lights up and the snowfall making a little bit more difficult to see, wouldn't you say?
I would say it was confusing, yes.
Now, Mr. Walker, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the moments just before that you witnessed the accident. I imagine the accident must have been really startling and very unnerving to see. Is that right?
You know, it did. Now that you mention it, when I first saw that, I was a little scared.
Okay. And you were on the southeast corner of the intersection looking west across Howard Avenue. Is that correct?
Yes, I was.
And this was just outside the Mad Hatter bar. Is that right? About half a block away?
About half a block, yes.
Okay. And you walked out of the Mad Hatter and you walked a few steps toward the intersection and you noticed the snowfall and all of these beautiful Christmas lights. And then you noticed these two cars that were coming down the street, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And they were coming in opposite directions and you were concerned they were about to hit each other, right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Now, I would imagine that as soon as you saw that these cars were both entering this intersection and didn't seem to have any sign of stopping, you stopped thinking so much about whether the light was about to change, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't even pay any attention to the light at that point. My focus was whether or not there was going to be a wreck.
Right, because surely you wouldn't have attempted to cross the street no matter what color the light was if there were two cars coming into the intersection with no sign of stopping.
No,
right?
Absolutely not.
So I imagine your safety with these two cars about to collide right in front of you was pretty heavily on your mind, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was a little scared, yes.
And you say in your direct examination that you noticed the cars about the time you expected the light to change. Do you recall that?
I do, yes.
And so you think that light had probably been red for a while then if you were expecting it to change any moment. It hadn't just changed to red while you were watching it, had it?
No, I expected it to change at any instance.
Okay, and so you're watching the cars for a few seconds. I believe your statement says between 2 and 4 seconds. Does that sound right to you?
2 and 4 is correct, yes.
Okay, and so you agree then, Mr. Walker, that since you were no longer looking at the light and the light could have changed while you were staring at the cars, right?
So, you know, it sure could have. It sure could have changed because, you know, up to 4 seconds, I wasn't even paying attention to that light. I was going to see if there was going to be a wreck.
Right. And so would you agree, Mr. Walker, that on this snowy, dark night with the Christmas lights twinkling around you and flashing and making it a little harder than usual to see the traffic lights and with your attention riveted to the cars as they were approaching the intersection, and after a long day at work and a couple of drinks from the bar, maybe you don't have as clear a memory of the lights as you might otherwise have had, wouldn't you say?
That's a possibility. I might not, my mind might have been a little clouded that evening. Yes.
Well, and you do say in your statement, the same day as the accident, when you were asked, you say you weren't sure what the color of the light was. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. No further questions.